As the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, makes more enemies for itself, traditional apparel has become a problem as well, especially the somewhat similar-looking Japanese kimono, Korean Hanbok, and traditional Chinese apparel, or Hanfu. In China, Japanese appliances are popular, Japanese comics and games are popular as well among the younger generation. However, in recent years, if girls like the quiet, elegant Japanese kimono, then there is a risk involved. In particular, they need to watch out for the older generation of Chinese dama, and daye. You are not allowed to take pictures here. Please leave.
Wow, you're morally kidnapping me.
Please get out of here. You're in China and you're wearing a Japanese kimono.
Which law says I can't wear kimono? Read it out for me. Which law in the Constitution says I can't wear kimono?
You forgot the Nanjing Massacre. You are the most shameful. Shame on your ancestors. Garbage. Call the police.
You guys are guilt tripping. Can you tell me which law in China prohibits me from wearing kimono?
The Japanese invaded your ancestors. You still wear kimono. Are you Chinese? I'll scold you. You'll be punished. Your ancestors were trampled on by the Japanese. You still wear Japanese clothing. It's disgusting to see. Arrest them. Arrest them. You still wear this outfit. You don't take it off? Ah, you girls. You haven't seen the pictures of the Japanese invading your ancestors. Don't stand here. Get out of Dali. Don't come to Dali again. Get out of Dali. You are colonial slaves. Get out of our Dali. Colonial slave, wear that kind of clothes. Get out of Dali.
This is not a single case in China. In 2014, Beijing suddenly decided to set up a national memorial day for the victims of the Nanjing Massacre. It's part of the CCP's comprehensive system of bundling patriotism with party-loving propaganda. On December 13, 2021, National Memorial Day, a woman dressed in a kimono on the street was reported and the police were the first to respond. According to the Chinese media, the police sternly criticized and educated her about her inappropriate behavior. Chinese people's hostility towards the Japanese people has something to do with the history of Japan's invasion of China, but it's largely due to the CCP's intentional propaganda to inflame the Chinese people's hatred of Japan over the decades. As the CCP tries to avoid being held accountable for the many social problems in China, it needs to create some imaginary enemies to distract the public. The reality is that the CCP was thankful for Japan's invasion of China. The Kuomintang government responded to Japan's war of aggression and sacrificed greatly during World War II. Meanwhile, the CCP was quietly building up and developing its own armed forces. According to the official publications of the CCP, Mao Zedong, the first CCP leader, thanked Japan for invading China at least 6 times. When the Japanese Prime Minister visited China in September 1972, he said to Mao, "Japan's invasion of China has caused a lot of pain for the Chinese people," to which Mao replied, "Without Japan's invasion of China, there would have been no Communist Party victory, let alone today's victory." In 1955, Mao's government shocked the world by announcing that it had waived Japan's huge war reparations. At that time, the Chinese people were in extreme poverty and experienced a terrible famine 4 years later. In addition to Japan, Korea has also faded out of the CCP's circle of friends in recent years for various reasons. In the 2022 Olympic Winter Games in Beijing, a single traditional Korean dress ignited a wave of discontent in South Korea. On February 5th, South Korea's culture minister expressed concerns about a possible misunderstanding between South Korea and China following the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games. In a ceremony on February 4th, a woman wearing a Korean traditional dress appeared among those representing China's different ethnic groups. The Korean culture minister, who was at Beijing, said the depiction could be seen to question South Korea's sovereignty. Referring to people as a minority means it hasn't become a sovereign country, which could cause misunderstanding when it comes to building good bilateral relations. The South Korean government has not issued an official statement, but South Korean politicians and activists criticized the opening ceremony and called it China's cultural appropriation. Some Korean citizens have also expressed their dissatisfaction. I was incredibly offended as it was crossing a line. I was offended as it was like they were claiming we were part of their territory. The Chinese embassy in Seoul released a statement on February 8th saying that the Hanbok belonged to ethnic Koreans everywhere, including in China and on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's foreign ministry estimates that there's about 2.5 million people of Korean heritage living in China. Many Chinese on social media shared the same opinion, meaning that Korean dress is one of China's ethnic minority outfits and belongs to China as well. The owner of this Hanbok store did not agree with it. I've been running this Hanbok rental shop for more than 10 years, and I've had so many Chinese customers come here to experience wearing hanboks. If hanbok was their costume, so many of their customers really didn't have to come here to put on hanbok before heading to Gyeongbokgung Palace. China is Korea's top trading partner, top export market, and top source of imports. In terms of foreign trade, South Korea's dependence on China is over 25%. Try as they might, South Korea finds it difficult not to offend Beijing. In 2016, South Korea agreed to let the US deploy the THAAD system in the country, triggering Beijing's embargo on South Korea. A number of Korean and Chinese co-productions changed their casting teams or were suspended from theaters. South Korean entertainment programs on mainland China's websites were revised or taken offline. Korean artist performance activities in China were also restricted. Since President Moon Jae-in took office, South Korea has made virtually no unfriendly remarks about China. In the face of diplomatic isolation, China wants to develop relations with South Korea. However, by now, there has been a dramatic change in the public perception of the CCP in South Korea. On January 12, 2022, the Institute of Asian Studies at Seoul National University released an analysis of the results of the 2021 Korean Asian Awareness Questionnaire. Hanbok Research, a pollster commissioned by the Institute, conducted a survey on the favorability of 20 major countries, including the US, China, Japan, Australia, Germany, and Vietnam, among 1,031 adult men and women. The results showed that 71.6% of the respondents chose the US as the trusted country. Only 6.8% chose China, which is the least trusted country in South Korea. That is to say, South Koreans' dislike for the CCP is growing stronger. South Koreans have expressed ire in the past over recent Chinese claims that some aspects of Korean culture, such as kimchi, a Korean side dish made with fermented cabbage, or traditional Korean dress called Hanbok, are of Chinese origin.
It's been like that since the past, but I think people have a lot more awareness on the problem by now because many people here have learned about those problematic claims of China through social media or YouTube. You might be a bit late, but it is not too late to take action to fix the issues from now on.
Historically, both Korea and Japan have been culturally influenced by Chinese culture that's thousands of years old. The clothing of the Tang and Ming dynasties in China has similarities with the Japanese kimono and Korean Hanfu. Not only the clothing, but also the architecture and some daily necessities and festive items all have similarities. China is predominantly Han Chinese. They account for about 1.2 billion of the 1.4 billion people in the country, so traditional Chinese clothing is called Hanfu or Han-style clothing. The Han people are not a simple ethnic group, but have a core ethnic group that has slowly assimilated other ethnic groups during the many ethnic blends throughout history. As a group that has formed and cultivated in this fashion, it has a history of close to 5,000 years of civilization. Hanfu has many different styles. In general, the distinctive features are the overall looseness of the garment. The collar looks like a lowercase y, the sleeves are wide and long, and belts are used in place of buttons. This form of apparel provides warmth to the body and serves a ritualistic purpose as well. It gives a person a subtle, restrained, dignified, and elegant demeanor. Hanfu is a manifestation of its own culture. China, which is predominantly Han Chinese, used to follow a long-standing belief in Confucianism as a core value, complemented by Taoism and Buddhism. Over the past 70 years, the CCP has sought to thoroughly cleanse traditional Chinese culture with its party culture. Even today, on the sophisticated modern stage, we see actors dancing in ancient costumes, yet the clothes have been modified. The demeanor and expressions of the actors are modern. The kind of indifference, sharpness, and body contortion they portray is the opposite of the essence of authentic classical Chinese dance. Many young people in China are now attracted to Hanfu, perhaps because of the huge number of historical TV dramas, or perhaps because of the cultural imprint left in their core. However, far more Chinese are no longer able to recognize their own traditional attire. This is in contrast to Japan, where 400 years ago Japanese officials told Spanish merchants arriving in Japan that Japanese clothing had remained the same for over 1,000 years. In 2010, in Chengdu, China, a Hanfu outfit worn by a girl was mistaken for a Japanese kimono by some patriots. These patriotic or party-loving people forced the girl to take off her Hanfu and demanded it to be burned. The girl had to go to the restroom of the restaurant to take off her outfit and give it to the angry mob. Because of the missing clothes, the girl hid in the restroom and was stuck. A kind-hearted person lent her a pair of pants before she made her way home. In the confusion between the Japanese kimono, Korean Hanbok, and Chinese Hanfu, the real troublemaker is the CCP. Its aggressive and offensive mindset has disrupted what could have been a harmonious relationship between different nationals and the international community. In the wave of public controversy and protest sparked by traditional attires, the topic of Western-style clothing seems to have been quiet. In 1900, the Eight-Nation Alliance, including Britain and France, once invaded China. In communist propaganda, no media outlets would dare to challenge the issue of whether or not wearing Western clothing implies defection to the West and American imperialism. A major reason for this is that the CCP's patriotic propaganda doesn't really follow logic. It is more about strategic tactics. Beijing hadn't anticipated for a long time before 2016 that the entire world dynamics would change so drastically today that the US would be in opposition to the CCP. Over the past 30 years, the official dress code of the CCP has undergone many changes. After the end of the Cultural Revolution, Communist Party leaders began to change the style of the clean-cut Zhongshan suit, also known as the Mao suit, at public events. In the 1980s, when the more liberal Communist Party leaders Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang were in charge, they vigorously promoted openness to the West and the leaders wore suits. This trend led to peasants in rural China even wearing locally made suits to work or relax in the fields. In 2009, during a parade to mark the 60th anniversary of the Chinese Navy's founding, Hu Jintao, then the Communist Party's top leader, wore a suit to review the Navy, a reversal of the past tradition of wearing military uniforms. Commentary suggested that Hu's dress code appeared to downplay the military and political implications of the parade. During the Jiang Zemin and Xi Jinping eras, Mao garments are usually worn on major occasions such as the CCP's founding day. In recent years, Chinese leaders have mostly worn dark-colored zip-up jackets during grassroots inspections, meetings, and other public events. Perhaps this is a kind of neutralization as the jacket has become a more politically ambiguous garment during a period of heightened anti-Western sentiment that the public is encouraged to follow. In 2021, China proudly presents the film The Battle of Lake Changjing, which depicts how the Chinese Communist Army defeated the American Army in the Korean War. During the Chinese New Year in 2022, the CCP launched another sequel in a big way. Just as the CCP has tampered with the historical reality of the anti-Japanese war in textbooks, these two films have also tampered with history. The first revamped the CCP's disastrous battle into a touching victory. The second described a battle that never happened. As for Western-style clothing, it's likely that the Communist Party realizes that it doesn't have the strength to challenge it in the near future, and that the Chinese people will never return to the days when all they wore was Maoist clothes. A more realistic option would be to quietly avoid the topic on the propaganda front.